right, let's get started here. So, welcome to the Center for Blue Economy Ocean and Coastal Resource Management Lecture Series. I'm Jason Scoris, I direct the center, and we are very happy to have Rod Fujita from the Governmental Defense Fund here. We've been working with Rod for many years on a variety of issues, and he is leading this Fisheries Solutions Center at EDF for the last few years, and he's kind of been cutting edge in a lot of thinking about fisheries and climate change and behavior design. So really fascinating thinker. So really happy to have him and talk about bringing fisheries into the digital age. So let's give Rod a warm welcome.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks everybody for coming out today. Let me ask you a question. How many of you have one of these? Everybody has? Okay, so there's no question we're living in the digital age, right? We've got hundreds of millions of people roaming the earth with these powerful little computers that can collect data of all kinds. They can take pictures, they collect video, all kinds of data streaming into these devices and then out into the cloud, where these data points are available to any individual anywhere in the world instantly. Think about that, though, right? It's amazing. Fisheries, on the other hand, are in the dark ages. There's some 5 million vessels roaming around the ocean looking for fish. And probably about 10% of those vessels are monitored in any way. Less than 1% carry electronic devices to monitor activities. This is a problem. It's got many aspects. So this curve probably looks really familiar to a lot of you at MIIS. This shows that a proportion of stocks in the world, fishery stocks in the world, that are overfished is increasing, right? And the number of stocks that are underfished, in other words, that's where the growth potential is for food production in the ocean, that's declining. That's not good in a world where the population is increasing and people are malnourished and malnourished. One can argue that a lot of that problem is because we don't monitor fisheries. Why do I say this? Because we know that the large fisheries that collect data and make a lot of money and do stock assessments and monitor catch are doing quite well relative to the sustainable targets. They're producing what's called maximum sustainable yield. That's about as much as we can expect to get out of these fisheries, right, over the long term. Small-scale fisheries, on the other hand, which do not collect data and do not generate do scientific stock assessments, right, and do not monitor their fisheries, are doing very poorly. That's what's driving that curve, right? That's mostly these thousands and thousands of small-scale fisheries operating around the world that are operating in the dark, basically. Not only is overfishing a big problem, which causes food security concerns, but bycatch continues to plague fisheries. Millions and millions of sharks, dolphins, sea turtles, seabirds, some of which are globally endangered species, are incidentally killed in fisheries every year. Why? Because there's almost no accountability. There's no data. There's nobody watching. Okay? Illegal transshipments at sea, where some vessel goes off, catches some fish somewhere, and instead of delivering it to a registered market or a port where it can be inspected and identified and a chain of custody can be established, instead delivers it for some price to a pirate vessel out in the middle of the Pacific, unobserved. This is one of the reasons why none of us can trust where our seafood comes from. Right? That high-grade tuna that you're buying in your fish market may or may not be high-grade tuna. Tremendous amount of fish fraud going on. And finally, the human tragedy of illegal trafficking and even slavery persists in fisheries. It's that dark corner of the world that has escaped scrutiny, where bad things can happen. Well, having painted that dire picture, let me try to shed some hope here. So, we know how to solve these things, right? They're not intractable problems. We know that we can make fisheries perform better by collecting scientific data on the status of stocks and how productive they are. We can calculate the catch limit that's required to maximize the yield over decades. And we can also monitor these fisheries and their compliance with these scientifically defined rules. That's how you get high performance fisheries. Good science, good rules based on the science, and good compliance with those rules. We can also get a handle on bycatch by monitoring bycatch and giving fishermen information about how to avoid it, creating incentives to motivate them to avoid sharks, turtles, seabirds, and other bycatch species. We can also make these fisheries more resilient to climate change. And our studies show that fishery management alone, if we brought it up to standard around the world, can help fisheries cope, right? Even with a moderate amount of climate change that's built in to the climate system due to past greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, and finally, we even know how to make fisheries more profitable, right? Currently, a lot of fisheries need subsidies because they aren't making any money. So governments are paying fishermen to overfish stocks on a massive scale, on the scale of billions of dollars a year. We know how to fix that. If we do all that stuff, if we do stock assessments, we collect scientific data, if we comply, if we collect data to enhance the compliance with regulations, and if we adapt to climate change, we can realize about a 30% increase in yield, even under climate change. Right? And we can increase the amount of fish in the water by 50 or 60%, because maximum yields come when biomass rebounds to the maximum single-digit level. So we can have a huge upside by collecting data, doing science, making rules based on the science, and enforcing those rules with compliance monitoring. Well, why do we care? This is not an academic exercise. This is a high-stakes problem. Billions and billions of dollars depend on it. More importantly than that, in some people's view, is that some 260 million people depend on fisheries for their livelihood. Often, it's the most impoverished people in the world who must make their living fishing because they have no other options. Seafood is a major source of protein for a few billion people, but more important than that, we're finding through new science that it's an essential source of micronutrients, critical for brain development, cognitive enhancement, learning, right? So food security is not just having enough calories to make it through each day, it's having the food that you need to live a healthy, productive, and happy life, and that requires not just protein, fat, carbs, but also micronutrients. And seafood is a great source of those. Now, I say that we know the solution to these problems, we know how to make fisheries better, and it's true. However, every fishery is unique, right? They all are embedded in some unique cultural, social, economic, and biological context. So we need to solve these fisheries in a customized way. But when you look around the world, you notice that a lot of them are grappling with these 5 major challenges. So that's what I'm going to structure this presentation around today. As I mentioned, one big challenge is stock assessment, the science of estimating the amount of fish that are available to the fishery and how productive they are, and therefore what the sustainable yield is. Regulatory compliance, data that shows whether you're breaking the law or not, and then using that data to crack down on the violators. Avoiding bycatch, creating resilience to climate change and adapting to climate change, and generating more value for the fishermen from the fish that they do catch. The stakes are high, yes. Now, we think at EDF that technological breakthroughs, while not a panacea, not going to solve everything, can really supercharge existing efforts that are underway to solve each of those major fishery challenges. And there are vast arrays of technologies And so I'm going to simplify things by just talking about three major categories of technologies that we can apply to fisheries to solve these big challenges. One is sensors, right? Cameras, video recorders, temperature sensors, sensors that sense pH, right? Ocean current velocity. These are things that sit out there and take data in. Once you have all that data, you have what's called big data. And big data cannot be analyzed by a typical human brain. So we need this second category of technology called artificial intelligence. These are machine learning algorithms. These are neural networks. These are ways to use software and computers to find patterns in big chaotic data sets that come from the billions of sensors that are out in the world today. And then finally, there's networking technology. These are technologies that pull together disparate streams of data to make sense out of them. So data is not knowledge. Data is just data, but in numbers. To create knowledge from data, you need to interpret it. You need to find patterns, and you need to understand and critically think through what those patterns mean, and then you have to link all these things together into a network, which is then far more powerful than any individual piece of technology, right? So how does this apply to fisheries? Well, our vision is that these big industrial boats can become research platforms. They are covering far more of the ocean than any research enterprise could ever hope to cover. They're what's called a synoptic data gathering platform, or an opportunistic data gathering platform. So by outfitting boats with cameras, acoustic sensors, and other kinds of sensors for oceanographic conditions like temperature and pH, we can generate valuable streams of data that not only can help us manage the fisheries better, but could actually generate value for the fishermen if there are markets for these kinds of data, right? Who wants to know what the weather is out in the middle of the Pacific? Who wants to know what the bottom looks like near a coral reef? There are markets for these data streams. Okay, and then for the boats that are too small to carry these kinds of fancy sensors, there's a whole other class of really inexpensive and very robust sensors, like cameras that mount on a mast, get a 360-degree view of the deck. The problem is that these small boats are not capable of carrying the equipment required to process all the data. So we use AI, smart cameras, that parse the data into little bits and then send the bits to shore via cellular networks or Wi-Fi or whatever happens to be available. So these are intermittent transmitting systems as opposed to the big boat, which can access satellites and transmit data continuously. So this is sort of what we think fisheries could be like, both the large-scale fisheries that have money and capacity and power on boats, and these little small-scale fisheries that are experiencing huge problems in collecting data right now. We think that the technology is there to empower all fisheries of any kind to become science-based and therefore high-performing. Okay, so let's imagine that you are a fishing boat captain and you have a boat. You're based in San Francisco, where I live, and you're setting out before dawn to go try to find some ground fish here on the West Coast. This is a super diverse assemblage. A lot of you know that there's 90-some species of ground fish out there. Some of them are really, really productive, right? Like the soles and halibut and things like that. Some of them are not so productive, and some of them are still really overfished. And so we have a strong regulatory system here in the United States that says, thou shalt not kill the overfished species. They need to recover, but you can target the productive ones to try to make a living. So in this new world of smart fisheries, you, instead of just going out there and trying your luck, you have a map, a predictive map based on oceanographic conditions, recruitment events, habitat associations, all the data that you can find that's assimilated via AI into a forecast of where the productive species will be, which is a good place to fish, and where the unproductive species are, which are the places you probably ought to avoid if people want to get into regulatory trouble. So you're steaming out, you're taking in all this data, you're looking at your sensors, and you figure out that, yeah, we're sitting on top of a bunch of wrecked salt, and there's very little rockfish in there that's supposed to be unproductive species. So this is a good place to fish. You put your net down, sensors on the net, hydraulic sensors tell you when it's full, the crew pulls it up. And then computer vision is used to assess the size of the fish, which is a very important parameter for stock assessment. It's a measure of the growth rate of the population through demographic means. So right now we have to use rulers, but computer vision makes it possible to just measure these automatically. And someday we will have computer vision that can identify these when they're in non-orthogonal positions. So right now the technology is kind of like training babies, you know. The camera has to look directly at the fish, and it has to be profile and look exactly right for the machine learning algorithm to be able to recognize that as a wreck salt. But in fishing, of course, they're scattered all over the net. So the computer has to be a lot smarter. So we're working on new algorithms that can recognize species even when they're mixed together and in non-orthogonal conditions. It's a big challenge. And you know, while you're steaming back to shore, you're relaying all this information back to your buyer. So the buyer, if they want, can display exactly where the fish was caught, you know, what kind of condition it was in, what temperature it was stored at, and so what size they are right there at the supermarket, or maybe at your farmer's market. And then you can also rig things up, of course, with sensors on your boat. This is just an alert saying, oh, you know, a part of your radar is failing, maybe you ought to buy a new one. And then smart winches and maybe even DNA can be used to do this. We're still exploring that possibility. But somehow we use technology to quantify the amount of catch. It generates a catch report. Right, so digital data goes right to the buyer, it generates a fish ticket, and you can measure, you can compare how much was landed and how much was caught, and figure out whether you comply with your quota share. Okay, well that's great, right? Technology's wonderful. Well, what could possibly go wrong? Well, a lot. You know, we're not always great at estimating error. And so let's take like kind of the most basic fisheries technology right now. This is called electronic monitoring. It's basically a bunch of video cameras that are mounted on strategic parts of the vessel to get a good view of the deck where the awl is being made. They've got some hydraulic transducers that tell the computer when the winches are going so that you can define a fishing event so that the poor graduate student or human observer doesn't have to look at 17 hours of nothing in order to find the one fishing event. The videotape will kind of automatically go to that. It's got a GPS receiver and hard drives and all this stuff. So this is what the kind of the current generation of monitoring technology looks like. It's only on less than 1% of the vessels right now. And it's expensive. That's one of the reasons why it's only on less than 1% of the vessel. It's hard for most fisheries to afford this. It's a pretty crummy value proposition for the fishermen. This is mostly about generating value for society, right? Or for the managers, or for enforcement officers. The fishermen get very little out of this. They have to pay the money, but they get very little value out of it. There's privacy concerns, of course. Nobody really wants to have a camera on them, 24 hours a day. And even more important, there's data ownership concerns. Who wants this data anyway? Data is power, right? We're struggling with that right now with Facebook and all these giant corporations. Do they own our data or do we own our data? So there's lots of failure modes with technology. Technology can be useless. It can be less than useless. And, for example, in a country that already has a digital divide between the haves and have-nots, right? Having more technology and more data could actually broaden the gap between the haves and have-nots. The technology has-nots. and that's a power balance. Even if the technology is useful and doesn't do bad things, it could not be taken up, right? Because it's too hard to use, or it's too frail to be on a fishing vessel, or a number of other reasons. Even if the technology is taken up and it proves to be useful, sometimes they don't scale, right? Scaling is hard, especially for conservation measures. And then, of course, there's the unknown unknowns. These are the things that we can't even imagine that can go wrong because we don't know enough. So how do we mitigate this risk? Well, we think that user-centered design is a really good way to do this. This is basically using processes that emphasize empathy. Instead of cooking up some technology in San Francisco in my office, we go out to the field and we ask people, could you use this? You know, do you need a safety beacon? Would catch data help you in some way? You know? And once we understand what their needs are, maybe it's, you know, we want to sell fish for a higher price, but our buyer won't buy it because we can't prove the chain of custody. So those kinds of issues that come from the user drive the technology instead of the other way around. And that, I think, reduces substantially the risk of creating useless or less than useless technologies. Pilots can be an invaluable way to learn about the real-world applications of these technologies and iron out the problems that are inhibiting uptake. So when you put a camera on a boat and you find out that the bolts you're using are rusting in 2 days because they're not designed for use at sea, you find that out in the pilot, not when you're implementing, right? So stuff like that shakes out in the pilot. You design the pilots to maximize learning, right? And you also deploy pilots in a wide range of situations so that if you get success, it's not an idiosyncratic success. It's not a one-off, in other words. It's a representative sample of real-world situations where the technology can be used. That's part of the scaling strategy, so thinking through deliberately how you're going to scale for the successful pilot. Who are your ambassadors? Who are your peer groups? Who is the next level of audience that needs to take up the technology? What are their barriers? What are they concerned about? How can we mitigate those? That's what I mean by thinking through the technology scaling strategy. So we've tried to write all this stuff down. These are lessons that we've learned from the School of Hard Knocks in the 12 geographies we work in, fisheries around the world, and also through the research that's available. We've made these 2 guides. One of them is about designing and implementing electronic monitoring systems in fisheries. And the other one is a broader set of technologies and guidance for all those small boats out there that can't carry big fancy cameras. So you can find these guides on our website, fisheries.org, if you want to go out there and monitor fisheries. All right, so I'm going to tell you about some of these pilot projects that we're currently implementing right now to see if these principles work. And again, these were designed using this user-centered design approach with collaborative diagnosis. What is your problem? How can we help you? How can tech add value to your fishing business? How can tech add value to your fishery, period? What are the barriers you're going to encounter? How do we remove those barriers? How do we design this pilot together? Let's evaluate together, modify it. And then the scaling strategy consists of having representative pilots, not just one kind of pilot in one country. We analyze the enabling conditions for these pilots, and then we have several mechanisms that we use to scale things up. Not just technology, we actually use these principles in all of our work. We always use ambassadors to take a good idea from one fishery and transfer it to another fishery. It's peer-to-peer exchange rather than some NGO coming in and telling people what's best. And then we create these learning networks where these fishery practitioners can learn from each other. And often they include fishermen, government officials, scientists, NGOs, and everybody can contribute their unique perspective and skill set. We found this to be very effective. Now, here's the first pilot. It's down in the Gulf of Mexico where recreational fishing is really, really big. very popular. In fact, the recreational catch probably rivals that of the commercial catch. And so it's really, really important to understand how much fishing effort and how much fishing mortality can be attributed to the recreational fleet, right? That's the basis for good management. If it's almost half the total fishing mortality, you've got to know that number in order to manage this fishery. Unfortunately, we do not know that number for this fishery or many other recreational fisheries around the world, because the guiding philosophy has been sport fishermen can't possibly be having any effect on stocks because they're only catching 1 or 2 fish at a time. But when there's 14 million angler days, that adds up to a lot of fish. So it's an important source of mortality. And we think that we can use something called a smart pass camera. This is a high resolution video camera mounted at a high point above a narrow pass where lots of recreational boats go. And we're training this, again, this is like training a movement. So first we had to train it like, that's not a ship, that's a cloud. Not a ship, that's a bird. And now it's getting a little smarter, and it can tell like a commercial vessel from a recreational vessel. The next step is to get it so smart that they can tell a red snapper, center console, sport boat from any other kind of recreational boat, so we can count, right, and get a digital count. From these effort estimates, we can then calculate catch, which will then go into the stock assessment and help these managers manage this fishery on data. Another project is up north in Oregon. This is with the whiting fishery. This is a big industrial fishery with very large boats, very advanced technology. But they currently have to collect data. It stores on a hard drive on the boat, and then after 3 or 4 days of fishing, they come in, they take the hard drive out, they put it in a mailer, they send it to Vancouver, BC. There the data is analyzed, and then the products come back to the council in Oregon. It's kind of nuts. That's not real-time management. It's not good for climate adaptation. It's not really good for anything. So we're testing the wireless transmission of data packets from these video cameras by using artificial intelligence, again, to parse the video stream into little bite-sized pieces, and then sending that over the satellite to reduce costs, increase the speed of transmission, and make it possible for the analysts to just view the important parts and create data products really quickly so that we can enable almost real-time management, and that's much, much more adaptive to climate change. Here in Monterey, we've got a project with the small boat fleet that has been kind of frozen out of the groundfish fishery because of those big rockfish closure areas. These guys, in order to get back into the fishery, have to show that they can catch the productive stocks efficiently and also avoid the unproductive stocks. They are too small to carry human observers. They don't make enough money to carry a $10,000 electronic monitoring system. So we're testing these little inexpensive video cameras, and they're also testing at the same time a unique gear that they've invented that flies through the water and right at the right depth to intercept productive stocks and avoid the unproductive stocks. So far, so good. We've had several tows with 0 bycatch. And we want to use the cameras to document that and show the management entity that indeed these small-scale fishermen can do what they say they do. They can target the productive stocks and avoid the weak stocks. This is another project down in Southern California, actually, where there's small trawlers, and right now they have to account for all the species they're catching, right? This is a mixed fishery. Like I said, there's 92 species. They catch 25 species of rockfish. And the poor crew people have to sort these species by hand into buckets on the deck when they could be fishing or doing something more productive, right? So that the observer can count them. We think that this is really well suited to computer vision. So again, if we can train a camera and AI system to recognize species that are splayed out on a deck, right, instead of orthogonally lined up with the camera, then we can save the crew a lot of time and really boost their profits a lot. This is another application, I think, for eDNA, which is a technology that samples the DNA that's leaked from fish out into water. Now, it's hard to do this in the ocean. In fact, it's impossible to do this in the ocean because the DNA gets too diluted. But in a fishing boat, they typically just throw all the fish into a hole, and then if we can get them to just keep the water still for a while and take a sample of the water, the DNA should be at high concentration to measure the species composition, right? So instead of sorting all these things in buckets, we just take a DNA sample, tell the council, these are the species they caught. In Indonesia, blue swimming crab is a very, very important commercial fishery, supports millions of livelihoods throughout the country. And they're on a course to do science-based management, but they had been using paper records like so many fisheries do. They asked the fishermen to fill out this form, and then these enumerators take the form, they transcribe it to another form. They take those forms and then they store them in a closet where nobody looks at them for several years. It's really a terrible, terrible way to collect and transmit data, right? So we're using a smartphone app. All these fishermen have at least feature phones, if not an iPhone. And so we developed an app that can run on a typical feature phone in Indonesia. And it had drop-down menus so that you can enter the data without making mistakes. Often when we're using data from fisheries like these, we spend hours and hours and hours cleaning it up because they've entered bushels instead of pounds or kilograms. There's a lot of errors that you have to detect. So these smartphone apps really reduce the rate of error. They make much cleaner data. And of course, there's no paper involved. So the files go directly from the smartphone into our cloud server, and then we can analyze it immediately. Down in the Gulf of California, there's a new hake fishery starting up. These fishermen really, really want to get marine stewardship certification so they can sell to Whole Foods and Walmart and all these buyers that are insisting on the sustainability criteria right now. But right now they can't prove it. Like they can't prove that they're catching their catch in accordance with all the regulations. So they've asked us to mount cameras and temperature sensors and other technology on their boats to provide that catch documentation that is required for traceability in the fishery. And finally, in Chile, Chile has got, it's a leading seafood exporter, right? It's a major fishing power. And they have one of the best fishing laws in the world. They've devolved power, they've got community-based management, they've divided the coast into fishing areas called caletas. They have a bunch of marine reserves. It's just super progressive. You couldn't ask for a better policy, but it's not working at all. Mainly, illegal fishing is degrading the entire system. The rule of law, in fact, is falling apart in Chile. So the fishermen there have asked us to help them solve this problem. Right now, what they do is they send some poor guy out to turf, the fishing area, for 3 days, all by himself, to guard it. And sadly, that doesn't even work, despite the great personal sacrifice, because all the illegal fishing is done at night or in the fog, so you can't see them. So we were testing a low-cost radar system and also hydrophones, which we can use artificial intelligence to detect the noises that are unique to fishing. So the radar sees the boat at night. We can't prove that it's illegally fishing, but the hydrophone picks up a sound that sounds like chiseling. We know that means abalone poaching, and that's enough information to sit the enforcement officers on that boat. So those are our pilots. As I said, technology is not a panacea. It's not going to solve all these fisheries challenges by itself. You need to have good governance. You need to have economic incentives for uptake. You need a lot of other ingredients. But I think that these are a good start. And to get to this vision of smart fisheries around the world that are collecting data, that are making good profits, that are maximizing their yield because they're using science, what do? Well, we have a lot of pilots, but not enough. Like I said, we want to have a representative set of pilots that not only span many geographies around but also many cultural and biological contexts around the world. And also, we want to have a pilot that addresses each one of those 5 challenges that I showed in that slide before. So right now, we're trying to develop pilots that are in more developing countries, because a lot of our pilots are in the United States. We'd like to have a couple more pilots that show how technology can increase climate resilience by generating more real-time data. And we'd like a couple more projects on transferability, traceability in supply chains and generating value. So, let me pause there and see if we have questions about any of this stuff. And I really welcome, you all use technology, right? And I really welcome your thoughts on what else could go wrong. This is a new initiative. We're very open to suggestions. And we know that we have our blind spots. So I welcome your views on that and any other questions we have. Thank you. Is there some climate change going on in this room?
So some of, a lot of the sensors that you talked about are on the boats, right? For the radar and acoustic sensor in your last example, those are stationary, right?
Yes.
So are they land-based or deployed at sea, or?
The hydrophone is in the ocean,
Okay.
right? And the radar is land-based, has to be at a high elevation. The reason we're interested in those technologies is that, especially if you're illegal fishing, you can only see certain things remotely, right? And only certain boats carry these technologies. For example, one of the most successful technological approaches to detecting illegal fishing is something called global fishing watch. It uses transponder data, vessel location data that's sent every 5 minutes from a VMS system or an AIS system. These are anti-collision, so a lot of big vessels want them because it keeps you safe at sea. So they're kind of as a byproduct sending their position every 5 minutes. Now you can use that location information to track these vessels, and you can see kind of suspicious things at it. So like if a vessel is coming from Thailand and it stops in Myanmar, and then it goes out in the middle of the Pacific, and then it stops, and then it meets another vessel, slavery might happen, right? So you make this inference, and you can train a computer to detect these patterns as well to alert enforcement. The problem with that is that it can only see the vessels that are carrying these transponders, right? It cannot see the millions of pongas, the little skiffs, the open deck vessels that make up most of the world's fishing. So we need to use technologies that do not depend on the fishermen agreeing to carry a transponder.
Right.
Yes?
So at the start of your presentation, you kind of talked about how a lot of these technologies had a lot of value to society, but kind of little value to the fishermen. And then later, you did talk about how it helps the fishermen and all that. So kind of answered the question, but I was still curious if did you see a conflict of interest with these technologies? Have you been running into that or have any examples?
We haven't seen a conflict of interest. Sometimes the interests are not exactly aligned, right? Like the managers want compliance data, the fishermen like, no, we don't want to do that, but we will, because that's what the law says. So what we're looking for and struggling, and actually this is a good place to pose this question because all of you are interested in startups and entrepreneurialism, right? We are really struggling to find ways to use technology to add value to a fishing business. So our big idea is to create traceability so that the fishermen can document their catch and say to Whole Foods, hey, I caught this fish here, it was kept at this temperature the entire time, you can depend on it, blah, blah, blah. That's okay, but we're looking for other bright ideas for how we can generate value for fishermen. Selling oceanographic data is one, for example. If there's one selling weather information. Yes?
Just in terms of traceability, have you guys been able to incorporate any successful uses of blockchain for traceability, or is that still too far out?
No, there's an experiment in the tuna fishery. So blockchain kind only makes sense if it's a really high value product and you have absolutely no trust in anybody, right? That's what blockchain is, it's a trust technology.
Yeah.
So in my view, it's a little bit of overkill for a lot of fisheries. You don't really need to have like highly encrypted, spreadsheets if you have a modicum of trust. But yeah, there's a chain blockchain experiment. There's another experiment which returns value to the fishermen for collecting those data called Fishcoin. And it needs the blockchain it needs the blockchain to kind of securely transfer the currency back, so that's another application. Yes?
It sounds like a lot of this technology is really expensive and inaccessible right now, but as this kind of stuff becomes cheaper, easier to use, easier to get a hold of, is there a concern that IUU fisheries will be using this kind of technology to increase their catch in the same way that some of the more reputable vessels may be using it to decrease their catch?
Yeah, they already do. Yeah, I mean, they're not using spotter planes like the legitimate tuna fishermen do, but they use fish finders and all that stuff. I think that, that a lot of the technology is already at a price point, like even for these little vessels in Chile that we work with, they're barely making any money. They can afford $150 GPS tracker. And they kind of like it because it enhances their safety and sea. So like before the tracker, nobody knew where the heck they were all day. Now we know where they are, so it has a transponder that kind of enhances the safety. So the idea is to try to bundle stuff like that together, stuff that makes the fishermen feel good about it, stuff that produces data useful for them. Yes?
In developing technology, you're also working with regulators and managers, because it's most fishermen can't use electronic monitoring in the groundfish fishery. I think it's they still need to have a person on board, and that restricts when they're fishing to when the person's available. How far away do you think it is to have maybe even 100% electronic monitoring of the west coast of the U.S.?
Yeah, it's been this close for about 10 years. They keep saying, yes, we're going to relax this regulation because all the data show that the electronic monitoring is spot on. It's really, really good. It has a very high correspondence with the human experience. So there's not a data problem, it's a regulatory problem, as you point out. And yes, we are trying to convince the regulators. There's a big data modernization movement going on in the United States right now. And there's a bunch of groups kind of working on the government to try and get this thing together to release these very cumbersome restrictions on the use of these technologies.
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Talking about how expensive and inaccessible a lot of this technology is, I think I heard a few gasps when you mentioned the pilot that has zero bycatch. It seems like there would be a lot of organizations, people, sponsors, researchers, funders for stuff like this. Is it all EDF funding, or do you guys have outside stakeholders that are really pushing these projects?
We have philanthropic funding, right? So we're a nonprofit, so a foundation gave us some money to do that pilot. A lot of logically, you're absolutely right, that people should be like falling over themselves to invest in this project, right? Zero bycatch, everyone wants that. The problem is that in the fishery, there's just no money to invest. And also, there's sort of a bunker mentality in this particular fishery. So like, and in fact, this was a pervasive attitude in the whole West Coast fishery 10 years ago before the reforms kicked in. It was a non-profitable fishery. And it declined from a $200 million a year enterprise to like a couple million a year. The whole thing collapsed in 2000. So everybody was in debt up to their eyeballs. Nobody was thinking about investing in anything. They were just trying to survive. Now, some segments of the fishery are doing better economically. They're the ones who are most progressive. They're the ones who are carrying the cameras, right? They're the ones who are trying to sell the products and get it certified and all that stuff. And then the small boat fleet is still in that kind of bunker mentality where they just don't have the capital. And they also don't have access to capital. We tried to fix that by creating something called the California Fisheries Fund, which takes philanthropic money, rolls it up into a revolving loan, and then puts it out into fisheries that want to make those kinds of investments. And it worked kind of, but there's not a huge demand for credit, I think because of this bunker cycle. Yes?
If you guys achieve like widespread implementation, is there like a satellite infrastructure already in place? Do you use pre-existing satellites, or do you have to create new ones to grab your data?
Yeah, right now the satellite transmission is kind of expensive, but we think that this new generation of microsatellites and iridium in particular will not only increase the geospatial coverage and make it possible for folks to transmit data from anywhere, but it'll also really reduce the transmission cost a lot. So we're hoping that having millions of microsatellites in the atmosphere is another question, but it will produce lower transmission costs for sure. Some of these more kind of high revenue fisheries can already afford to use the existing satellites to transmit data, particularly if you use this parsing technology to cut down the data size. Yeah, Jason.
Is any of this technology able to help fishermen kind of identify higher quality fish? So either maybe size or the type of fish, so that within a given quota, they could get more money through a kind of a discriminatory kind of technology that told them which fish are, high value versus low value.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if you had real-time price information based on size or some other criterion of quality from your buyers, you could do it. I mean, if the cost associated with sorting your fish and meeting those market requirements does not exceed the margin that you would get, I'm sure you would do it. Right now, you don't have that information. You get the price when you land the stuff. You get one price for everything you catch. And a lot of that is because of the market structure. Here on the West Coast, there used to be custom buyers and little operations that could do that kind of thing. Like, I'd like a nice big halibut, that's what we want, right? Now it's all consolidated, it's $1 billion business. And they buy stuff from anybody, it's all about volume. And they have too much market power relative to fishery, in my view. So that's why you don't get that kind of innovation right now. I think the catch share program will transfer a little bit more market power to the fishermen, relative to the buyers. And already you're seeing some kinds of innovation like that on the marketing side. Because people under a catch share program can fish for value, right? Because they're not trying to maximize the volume of their catch. That's the trick. So yeah, I think that it's eminently doable. In fact, we have a project in Mexico where the fishermen had no idea what the final market price was for their fish, and they were selling their fish to the nearest buyer for pennies a pound, and the buyer was getting millions of dollars. So that it creates a power imbalance, right? It creates far too much negotiating power on the part of the buyer relative to the fishermen, so they get screwed. And so we're trying to think of clever technology we can do to get real-time price information to these fishermen. And we tried all these fancy things, and then we got this idea of, well, let's just hire somebody to walk around in a major market in Mexico City and look at the prices and put it on Facebook, because all the fishermen are on Facebook. And that's how we get our real-time pricing. Yes?
I think you had Giuseppe Panisi on a few of your slides.
Yeah.
And he had cameras, and he thought he found a lot of buried sunken treasure.
He did?
Yeah, there's a big article in the San Francisco Chronicle, but his cameras monitor fish and how his nets are working to be more sustainable. And he actually inadvertently saw some gold ingot.
Yeah, he's a great partner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Going forward, especially with some of these pilot programs in developing countries, I sort of anecdotally know that a lot of places are like getting smartphones, but they're still like, I've lived in Miami for 2 years and almost everyone has still a little dumb phone, for lack of a better term. So what do you imagine going forward for places like that?
Well, so there's some remote villages in Indonesia that we're working with. Yeah, people don't have it. So what they do is they have one cell phone in their family, and they have someone who's literate, right? Because a lot of them are literate, and that's the person who translates our. So it's efficient, places. But there are concerns, right, about disrupting things. It's a very disruptive technology. My view is that, you know, everybody else has access to the technology. It's kind of paternalistic to sort of say, well, we might spoil their culture. And it's self-determination. So it's a call you have to make when you're introducing these disruptive sort of things into different cultures in order to try to push it. Yes?
Are there any programs working to create value by using this technology to just bypass the middlemen in the market? And say, like, I have X amount of fish that I just scanned, and now Costco wants to buy X amount, so then there you go.
Yes, and that's particularly pronounced in fisheries that already have kind of short supply chains, where you're creating enough volume, like you're not going to sell to Walmart or Costco if you're just a vessel, right? But if you're a big hake vessel, yeah, you're going. So you get a 30,000 pound catch, you could sell that directly. And yes, so fishermen are already doing that. You can go to Half Moon Bay, you can find a lot of entrepreneurial fishermen who have an app, they have customers, they send out the information, customers meet them on the dock, and they just buy directly from the account. So, but I would kind of caution against thinking that that's always a good thing, because, you know, those 260 million people who depend on fisheries, like a lot of them are miserable, and a lot of them are related to fishermen in these small-scale fisheries contexts. And they do perform valuable services, like they make it possible to sell more parts of a blue crab than you ordinarily would, right? If you didn't have those middlemen mediating the sale of those products and byproducts to different markets. So it's not uniformly bad to have complex supply chains. A lot of us think it's just siphoning off value, but it's actually generating value in such cases. Yes?
So I worked on some vessels that were piloting cameras inside the nets to monitor like prohibited species or bycatch species, so the fishermen could pull it up if they saw like there were too many salmon going in, for example. I was wondering if the EDF was doing anything with those kind of projects. And
yes, we would love to develop a smart camera that's in the net, sees the salmon, or maybe the acoustic device, because cameras don't work that great in these waters are too dark. So acoustics, if it can be trained to recognize the salmon and differentiate from the hake, and then rig to trigger an escape valve, right? So that the captain doesn't have to haul when they see that salmon. It would save the captain more money. We have an analogous problem in Japan, where a lot of the nearshore fishery is prosecuted with set nets, right, which are unselected. They can't see anything that the current brings their way. And now Japan has a new regulatory system that says we need to crack down on bycatch, we need to say catch them. So the set net fishery is going, how do we do this, you know? And so I think the key is a similar setup where you have a sonar device or a camera if it's clear enough to detect the unwanted species, signal the fishermen to release the net just when that species enters, and then close it back up so that you don't lose your entire year's catch because a bluefin is going to happen to wander in your net.
All right, well, oh, one more, go for it.
I'm just curious, because you've talked a lot about the sensors, but on the application side, are there any kind of programs that are, like if you're configuring a new boat or new sensor suite or platforms, like how you're aggregating all that data and then running your unsupervised models or your computer vision models, like how are you aggregating all that and who's controlling that?
Yeah, good question. There's a lot of work to be done on that side of things. You know, the sensors are relatively easy.
Right.
So data processing, visualization is the bear. We work with Snap IT and some other technology providers to do the machine learning algorithms. But we also welcome partnerships with academics and technology developers who want to take a crack at some of these really difficult machine learning problems. And a lot of times, you know, the technologies that we're using, for example, in the Monterey boats, the really the weak link is the visualization. You know, it's just, they're not attuned to how the data need to be presented in order to facilitate management or to provide the documentation that was made for other purposes. So somebody needs to get in there and rewrite the software so that it produces the graphs and charts and things another aspect of human-centered design, understanding exactly what the user needs and then delivering that.
Right.
Okay, time to enjoy your farm market produce. Thanks for your attention.